Lightning cracked across the sky like a whip splitting leather. The floor-to-ceiling windows of Restaurant Ferraro trembled with each thunder strike, rain hammering against the glass in sheets so thick you could not see the San Francisco streets beyond. Inside the private booth at the back of the restaurant, behind mahogany panels and velvet curtains, the most feared man in the city knelt on marble flooring that cost more than most people earned in a year. Lucian Ferraro was 6'2", shoulders broad enough to block out light, with dark hair silvering at the temples and a scar running from his left eye to his cheekbone like a blade had carved its way across his face. His tailored suit, hand-stitched in Milan, cost $8,000. It was soaking in spilled red wine. His hands trembled. Those hands had signed 47 death warrants. Those hands had built an empire that stretched across 3 states. Those hands had never trembled before. But now they hovered uselessly over the small body convulsing on the leather booth seat, over the 6-year-old boy whose lips were turning blue, whose small chest heaved with sounds that were not breathing but something far worse. Noah. His son. The child his entire empire had been tearing the city apart trying to find for the last 3 months. The boy's mouth opened and closed like a fish pulled from water. A piece of food, no larger than a marble, was lodged deep in his throat. His eyes were wide and terrified, the same dark eyes as his father, and they were beginning to glaze. Sergio and Enzo, his most trusted lieutenants, stood frozen beside the booth. Sergio's hand moved toward his phone. Enzo's jaw clenched so hard you could see the muscle jump beneath his skin. The restaurant owner stammered into a telephone receiver, his voice cracking, talking about doctors 2 blocks away, ambulances, minutes that felt like centuries. Lucian reached for his son. His hands, which had orchestrated precision violence, which had negotiated with senators and smuggled cargo worth millions, did nothing. He did not know how to fix this. He did not know how to save the boy he had just found 3 days ago, broken and terrified and hiding in a downtown shelter run by some nameless charity organization. The small body went limp. That was when the restaurant door slammed open. A woman staggered through, drenched from the thunderstorm outside. Her soaked hair stuck to her face in dark strands. One eye was swollen completely shut, the surrounding skin a landscape of purple and black that spread across her cheekbone like a bruise in the shape of a fist. Handprint bruises circled her throat like a necklace made of violence, each finger mark visible, fresh, the skin beneath them raw and gasping for air. She wore a soaked nanny uniform, white now transparent and clinging to her frame, with the embroidered Langford family crest visible over her heart. Blood dripped from her split lip onto the white marble floor in small dark pearls. Her hands shook as they gripped something small and worn, a child's first pair of tiny shoes, leather cracked with age, the kind of thing only someone with nothing would hold onto because it was all they had left. She was 32 years old and looked 50. She was nobody. Just a woman stumbling out of a storm, bleeding, broken, invisible in the way that poor people become invisible to the world. But she saw Noah dying. While Sergio stared. While Enzo's hand fell uselessly to his side. While Lucian Ferraro, king of the underworld, knelt frozen on $8,000 marble, she moved. She dropped to her knees, the broken shoes clutching to her chest. Her hands, despite their shaking, moved with the kind of practiced efficiency that only comes from saving people when no one else will. She positioned herself behind the boy with a precision that made her movements look like prayer. Her arms encircled his small body. Her hands found the exact spot beneath his rib cage where such things are done. 3 sharp thrusts. Upward. Hard. Perfect. The piece of food rocketed from Noah's mouth like a bullet fired from an invisible gun. The boy gasped, a sound like air itself being torn, and then he coughed, a wet, glorious, earth-shattering cough that meant life returning to a small body that had been moments away from becoming memory. He breathed. The child breathed, and the woman who had saved him collapsed backward, her own breathing shattered, her body folding like it was made of paper. The small shoes fell from her hands onto the cold floor. Lucian stared at her, this stranger who had just done what his entire empire could not. What his money could not buy. What his violence could not force. What his power meant nothing against. She had saved his son while everyone else stood frozen like statues in a tomb. But what she did not know, what she could not possibly know as she knelt bleeding on that marble floor, was that the boy she had been protecting for 3 months, the traumatized child she had smuggled food to every single night after working 14-hour shifts as a live-in nanny, the broken kid she had sung to sleep in secret in the shelter's darkest corner, the small desperate person she had loved when no one else would, was the missing heir. The only son of Lucian Ferraro. The boy the entire San Francisco underworld had been tearing itself apart trying to find. The heir whose disappearance had sent 15 black SUVs into the streets. Whose face had been given to every detective, every crime boss, every rival family in 3 states. The child she had saved was the one thing Lucian would have burned the world down to protect. Before we continue, drop a like if this story hits you. Share it with someone who needs to hear it and subscribe so you don't miss what's coming tomorrow. Now, let us go back to the beginning, 3 years earlier, to understand how a woman with $34 in her pocket and the weight of invisible loss came to be bleeding and broken on the marble floor of a restaurant where gods among criminals knelt in helpless desperation. 3 years before the thunderstorm. 3 years before Noah. 3 years before Lucian Ferraro discovered that real power was not found in dominion over others but in one woman's refusal to let the people she loved fall into darkness alone. The apartment on Folsom Street was the size of a converted closet because it was, in fact, a converted closet. A wealthy family, the Langfords, had renovated their Victorian mansion on Russian Hill and decided that the house staff, the nanny, the cook, the groundskeeper, should live where they worked, small and compact and out of sight. They had walled in the old linen closet on the 3rd floor and installed a single bed, a dresser with 3 functioning drawers, and a window no larger than a showbox that faced the alley below. This was where Aria Santos lived. The rent was $800 a month, paid directly from her wages, which came to $2,000 per month before taxes. Rent, bus pass, phone, food. That meant she lived on approximately $300 for everything else in a city where a cup of coffee cost $4 and the cost of being alive consumed every penny before the month even began. On a Tuesday morning in July, 3 years before the thunderstorm, Aria sat on the edge of her small bed and counted her money for the 3rd time that week. $17. One $10 bill. 7 ones. Coins scattered across the worn comforter like they were the most precious minerals on earth. She had that $17 for the next 4 days, and she had to keep the children fed before she kept herself fed. Sophie Langford's children did not understand scarcity. They had not been taught about it. 8-year-old Madison left half her breakfast uneaten every morning. 6-year-old Thomas threw away perfectly good school supplies when he decided the color of his notebook did not match his mood. Their mother had instructed Aria to pack their lunches with organic ingredients, hand-cut vegetables, and fruit from the farmer's market on Union Street, and Aria did these things while her own stomach contracted in ways that made her lightheaded by evening. She was not supposed to eat the leftover food. But she did. The rule was that the staff ate after the family finished eating what remained, and what she did not use for the next meal got composted in the expensive aluminum bin Sophie Langford had specifically chosen. Aria had learned to time her movements so that no one would see her scraping leftover roasted chicken onto a plate, or wrapping extra bread in paper towels to hide in her closet, or drinking the last of the fresh squeezed orange juice that Madison had poured and then abandoned. Her stomach growled as she sorted the bills again. $17. Bus pass was already paid until Thursday. That left her exactly $17 to eat on for 4 days. That was $4.25 per day. That meant coffee was not an option. That meant that she would walk the streets in the fog and rain rather than spend 90 cents to stay warm somewhere public. The Langford house creaked around her. It was an old house, built in 1912, full of sounds that came from settling wood and expensive plumbing. Through the thin walls of her converted closet, she could hear Thomas crying in his room because Sophie had refused to buy him a certain brand of skateboard. Sophie's voice, sharp, crystalline, cutting, came through explaining that he should be grateful for what he had, a statement that felt like a personal accusation every time Aria heard it. She should be grateful for what she had. $800 a month for a room the size of a closet. $20,000 saved over 3 years, 3 months, and 18 days, and it still was not enough for the deposit on an actual apartment. Still was not enough to stop the constant terror of eviction, of homelessness, of the invisible knife that hung over her every waking moment. At 7 in the morning, Aria braided her dark hair, pulled it back from her face, and smoothed down her uniform. The nanny outfit was black and white, with a small embroidered crest on the chest that marked her as property. This is who she belongs to, the crest said. This is who owns her time, her body, her labor. She had 3 of these uniforms, rotated them daily, hand-washed them in the sink of her converted closet because the dry cleaner downtown would have consumed half her weekly budget. Madison needed her lunch packed. Thomas needed help finding his soccer cleats. Sophie wanted Aria to confirm that the catering company would arrive by 5 for the dinner party she was hosting that night. Small demands that came in a voice that never quite said please, that never acknowledged Aria's humanity or presence except when something needed to be done. By 9 in the evening, after the children were asleep, after the dinner party guests had filtered out, after the dishes were loaded into the dishwasher and the kitchen was returned to its pristine state, Aria walked toward the bus stop to begin her second job. The Langford house sat on top of a hill overlooking the city. The fog rolled in from the Pacific like something alive, wet and cold and suffocating. Her uniform was not designed for nights. She wore a thin jacket she had owned for 7 years, the zipper broken, held together with a safety pin. By the time she reached the bus stop, the damp had seeped into her bones. The diner was called Miller's, a 24-hour place in the Tenderloin where the coffee was always hours old and the smell of grease hung in the air like a permanent resident. Aria worked from 10 at night until 7 in the morning, 5 nights a week, washing dishes, clearing tables, wiping down the counter. The pay was $12 per hour. A full night's work, 6 hours after travel time, brought her $72 before taxes came out. Wednesday night, a woman at table 7 left no tip. Thursday night, a man complained that his eggs were runny and refused to pay, and the manager told Aria she would have to cover the loss. Friday night was better. A construction crew came in at midnight, hungry and generous, and she made $45 in tips. Friday morning, after her shift ended, Aria did not go home. She went to the subway station near the Tenderloin district. The shelter was called Hope House, run by a volunteer nonprofit that operated on donations and prayer. She had discovered it by accident 2 weeks earlier, had walked past it while trying to escape the cold, and had found something that looked like what the outside world might call community. The director was a woman named Patricia, 60 years old, with gray hair and the kind of tired eyes that came from seeing too much pain and not having enough resources to fix it. Patricia had said to Aria, "You're too young to look that exhausted," which was kind of her to say. Even though Aria was not too young, she was just exhausted in a way that young people were not supposed to understand. There were 7 children at Hope House that morning. The youngest was 3. The oldest was 10. All of them had been left behind, lost, given away, or abandoned. All of them slept on cots in a large room with peeling paint on the walls. All of them had learned not to hope for very much, because hope had been taken from them so many times that it broke differently each time. Aria brought bagels from Miller's diner, 3 of them wrapped in napkins, yesterday's stock that would have been thrown away. A boy named Noah, age 6, sat in the corner by himself. He had been found 3 months ago sleeping in a parking garage, and no one had come looking for him. He did not speak much. His dark eyes watched everything, cataloguing threats, preparing for abandonment. When Aria sat beside him and unwrapped a bagel, he did not move toward it. He did not trust her. She understood that feeling so completely that it made her chest hurt. "I am not going to hurt you," she said quietly. "I am just going to sit here while you eat, if you want to." Noah looked at the bagel. His small hand shook. Aria remembered being 6 years old, remembered learning not to trust the people who were supposed to love you, and she put the bagel on the cot beside him and waited. She did not touch him. She did not push. She simply remained, a quiet presence, a person who would not disappear immediately. After 5 minutes, Noah reached for the bagel. He ate it slowly, like he was afraid it would vanish. After he finished, Aria showed him a pair of tiny shoes she kept in her jacket pocket. They were leather, brown, worn soft from age, the first shoes her own mother had bought for her when she was born. She had kept them for 27 years, carried them through 17 different apartments, held onto them through every eviction and heartbreak and moment of absolute despair. "These are very old," she told Noah. "But they are still good. They are still here. Things that are worn do not mean they are broken." Noah looked at the shoes. Then he looked at Aria's face, her tired eyes, her thin frame, her hands that were perpetually cold. He put his small hand on her arm. Not holding it. Just touching it. Making contact with another human being who had not yet abandoned him. This was how Aria Santos learned to love someone who belonged to someone else. This was how she became the person who would one day, bleeding and broken, save a life on a marble floor while lightning split the sky outside. The rain started at 6:56 in the evening on a Tuesday in July, and it came down like a punishment that had been waiting months to arrive. Aria Santos stood at the kitchen window of the Langford mansion in Pacific Heights, watching the sky turn the color of a bruise. Behind her, the children were eating dinner, 2 boys, ages 4 and 7, and a girl of 9, all of them sitting at a table that cost more than Aria's entire monthly rent. She had prepared their food, cut their fruit into perfect triangles, poured their milk into glasses without a single spill. She had done this every evening for 3 years. In 3 years, the girl had never once called her by her first name. Her phone buzzed in her apron pocket. One text message, no sender ID, just 6 words, "Tonight. My office. Don't be late. Harold Brennan. The landlord." The reason her stomach had learned to digest itself. Aria's hands, which had been steady through 1,000 dinner services, began to shake. She gripped the edge of the sink. The kitchen smelled like roasted chicken and fresh basil, the kind of meal the Langfords ate without thinking about cost, without understanding that the money she earned in 2 weeks would not cover the rent increase Brennan had announced on Sunday. $2,400 a month, her entire wage, poured into a studio apartment in the Tenderloin that she barely slept in because she spent 14 hours a day in this house, in this kitchen, invisible. 18 months ago, her rent had been $1,800. Now it was $3,200. Now it was climbing. Now Brennan was making it clear that money alone would not be enough. She had $34 left to her name. Aria? The oldest girl, Emma, looked up from her plate. 9 years old, with her mother's blonde hair and her father's sharp eyes. "Are you okay?" Aria turned from the window. She had learned long ago how to arrange her face so that children could not see the cracks underneath. "I am fine, sweetheart. Just thinking about tomorrow." This was a lie. She was thinking about tonight. About a man who smelled like cigarettes and expensive cologne, who had started finding reasons to visit her apartment at odd hours, who had begun saying things that made her feel like the walls were closing in. She was thinking about the way he looked at her on Tuesday evenings when he came to collect the rent, the way his eyes moved over her body like she was inventory he owned. She was thinking about the fact that she had nowhere to go. At 8:41 in the evening, when the children were bathed and in pajamas and their mother had returned from her book club, Aria took off her apron and hung it on the hook beside the stove. 15 years ago, when she was 12 years old, she had learned that when a man told you to come to his office, you did not refuse. Refusal had consequences. Her mother had taught her that in a basement in Oakland, taught her through bruises and broken things and the understanding that her body was not her own. She had spent the next 15 years trying to reclaim it. The rain was worse now, falling in sheets that obscured the streetlights. Aria pulled her jacket tight, a thin denim thing, frayed at the cuffs, which had belonged to someone else before her. She did not own an umbrella. Umbrellas cost money. She walked down the hill toward the Tenderloin, her shoes soaked through, the July heat replaced by a cold that penetrated everything. Her apartment was 4 blocks from Brennan's office building. She could make it there in 8 minutes if she walked fast. If she walked at all. What stopped her was the smell of food. Enzo's Italian restaurant sat on Grant Avenue, nestled between a closed bookstore and a jewelry shop with bars on its windows. Aria had worked there once, 6 years ago, washing dishes in a kitchen so hot that by the end of each shift her hair was plastered to her skull. She had been paid in cash, $7 an hour, and the head chef had sometimes let her take home the leftover risotto in plastic containers. That was how she had made it through a winter when her previous landlord had locked her out for 3 weeks. She had not eaten since yesterday morning. Toast with no butter. A cold cup of coffee scavenged from the Langford kitchen. The rain intensified. Thunder rolled through the city like a warning. Aria's phone buzzed again. Another text from Brennan, "Where are you?" She looked at the restaurant. Through the rain-streaked windows, she could see warm light, the soft glow of candles on tables, the silhouettes of people eating and drinking and existing in a world where they belonged. She had never eaten at a restaurant as a customer. Food was fuel. Food was the leftover bagel at 6 a.m., the apple she peeled carefully to make last 3 days, the sandwiches she made for the Langford children that she watched them throw away half-eaten. She pushed open the door. Warm air wrapped around her like an embrace. The hostess looked up, and her expression shifted immediately. Aria understood that shift. It was the same shift she saw in every mirror, the assessment of someone who does not belong in spaces like this, who carries poverty the way other people carry perfume. "We're fully booked," the hostess said, which was a lie. Aria could see 3 empty tables. Thunder cracked directly overhead, so loud that the chandelier shook. The lights flickered once, twice, then steadied. It was the kind of storm that made people afraid, the kind that spoke in a voice older than cities. In that moment of darkness, Aria made a choice that would alter the trajectory of everything that came after. She did not leave. She walked past the hostess, past the dining room with its white tablecloths, deeper into the restaurant where the kitchen sounds grew louder. In the back, toward the private booths, the air changed. It became heavier. It smelled like something dangerous. It smelled like power. The private dining area had 3 booths, separated by half-walls and curtains. 2 were empty. The third held 6 men in suits that cost more than everything Aria owned. They were eating in silence. The kind of silence that comes when people are used to violence, when quiet is something they have learned to prefer to words. And in the center booth sat a man who made everyone else look smaller by comparison. He was 6'2", maybe 3, with shoulders that stretched the seams of his Tom Ford suit. His hair was black, silvered at the temples, swept back from a face that had been broken and reassembled so many times that the scars had become a kind of map. A long scar ran from his left eye to his cheekbone, precise and deliberate, like someone had used a blade to mark him as theirs. His eyes were the color of storm water, and they were focused on a phone in front of him, reading something that made his jaw tighten. Lucian Ferraro. Even though no one had told her his name, Aria knew. There was no other word for what he was. The way his men deferred to him, the way the air itself seemed to lean toward him, the weight of something violent and controlled that radiated from him like heat. She should have run. Every instinct she had ever developed, every survival mechanism that had kept her alive through 17 different apartments and 3 different cities, told her to turn around and walk back out into the rain. Instead, she stood motionless. The oldest of his men, gray-haired, with hands like iron, looked up and saw her. His expression hardened. He began to stand. Behind him, 2 other men moved their hands toward their jackets. That was when Aria's legs gave out. She had not eaten. She had not slept for more than 4 hours at a time in 43 days. Her rent was due in 5 days, and she had $34. A man who owned 7 buildings was waiting for her in an office 2 blocks away, and she knew with absolute certainty that when she arrived, he would expect her to give him something more than money. Her vision tunneled. The restaurant tilted. She saw the rain-streaked windows, the candles on empty tables, the faces of men she did not know, turning toward her as she fell. And then the floor was coming up to meet her, fast and inevitable, and all she could think was that at least she was warm before the darkness took her. The sound of her body hitting the marble was like breaking glass. The marble floor was cold against her skin. That was the first thing Aria became aware of as consciousness returned, not the softness of sheets or the warmth of blankets, but the shock of expensive stone beneath her, hard and unforgiving. Her eyes opened slowly. The ceiling above her was coffered, dark wood with gold leaf catching light from somewhere she couldn't see. Not the shelter. Not her studio apartment with the water stain shaped like a heart above the bed. This was something else entirely. She tried to sit up. Pain bloomed across her ribs where Harold Brennan's fist had landed 3 nights ago. Her left wrist throbbed, swollen thick as a grapefruit. When she looked down at her hands, they were clean. The dirt under her fingernails was gone. Someone had washed her. The bedroom door was open. She should have been terrified. Instead, Aria moved toward the hallway on unsteady feet, her bare toes sinking into carpet so plush it felt like walking on clouds. The penthouse revealed itself gradually as she descended, a living room that seemed to stretch forever, floor-to-ceiling windows showing San Francisco lit up like a circuit board after the storm. The Golden Gate Bridge glowed orange in the distance. She had lived in this city for 7 years and had never seen it from this height, this angle, this close to the sky. Lucian Ferraro sat on a leather couch the color of aged whiskey, and his son was asleep against his chest. Noah's head rested on the man's shoulder, his small body curved into the angle of Lucian's arm. One of Noah's hands clutched the collar of Lucian's white shirt. The boy hadn't spoken in 4 months, not since the night the Dimitri syndicate tore him from his nanny and vanished him into the underworld. Aria had found him at St. Catherine's shelter 3 weeks later, terrified and silent, and had spent every night since singing to him in the dark, bringing him food from her 2 jobs, keeping him safe while his father's entire empire tore itself apart searching. Now the boy slept like he was finally, truly safe. Lucian's eyes moved from Noah's face to hers. They were the color of storm water after a hurricane has passed, gray and deep and containing some kind of violence that had nowhere to go. He didn't smile. He simply watched her with the intensity of a man who had learned to read rooms the way soldiers read battlefields. "Don't move," he said quietly. Not a command. A request delivered in a voice that sounded like it had been dragged through gravel. "He needs this. He needs to know you're here when he wakes up." Aria should have run. Every instinct honed through 17 different apartments and 3 different cities screamed at her to turn around and disappear. Instead, she moved to the chair across from him and sat down carefully, as if sudden movements might shatter whatever fragile thing was happening in this moment. Sergio stood by the windows, arms crossed, watching the city lights. Enzo was near the kitchen, a phone pressed to his ear, his voice a low murmur of Italian. Both men had stopped looking at her like she was a ghost about 3 minutes after Lucian had carried her from that restaurant. Now they looked at her like she was a puzzle no one had been able to solve until tonight. "How long have I been asleep?" Aria's voice cracked. She hadn't used it in hours. 17 hours, Lucian said. Dr. Reeves came at 11:08 p.m. Cleaned your wounds, bandaged your wrist, it's not fractured, just badly sprained, and gave you something to help you rest. You didn't wake once. 17 hours. That meant she had slept through an entire day. That meant her phone had probably rung a dozen times. That meant Sophie Langford would have called the police by now, reported her missing, filed something official that would make her disappearance matter in the paperwork of the city. "I need to leave," Aria said. "I need to get back to." The sound that came from her throat was almost a sob, but she stopped it. She was tired of crying. She had spent the last 3 years draining herself through holes she couldn't plug, and she was tired of the water that poured out. Lucian leaned back slowly, carefully, so as not to disturb Noah. The boy didn't move. His breathing remained deep and even, the breathing of a child who had finally stopped running in his sleep. "St. Catherine's shelter on Mission Street," Lucian said. "You started volunteering there 8 months ago. 3 nights a week, you bring food from the restaurants where you work and you sit with the children. 4 months ago, a boy arrived. Age 7. Traumatized. Non-verbal. You began taking extra shifts to earn money to buy him clothes. You sing to him. Songs in Spanish that your own mother probably sang to you. Aria's throat tightened. How do you know that? I know everything about you, Aria Santos. He said her name like it was important, like it mattered. 28 years old. Hired as live-in nanny for the Langford family 3 years ago. Salary $2,400 monthly. You also rent a studio apartment at 847 Turk Street from Harold Brennan for $3,200 per month. The math has never worked. Not once in 36 months. So you clean offices on Sundays for $600 extra. You skip meals so your rent is paid. You wear the same 3 uniforms in rotation because you can't afford new ones. You have $34 to your name. $34. And somehow, despite all of that, you keep coming back to a shelter for traumatized children and you keep trying to save them. Each fact landed like a fist. Aria's hand shook. She clasped them together to make it stop. Why? Lucian asked. Just that. Just why? She looked at the tiny blue shoes on the coffee table, the ones that had fallen from her pocket when she collapsed. She had found them at a Goodwill in 2019. They were size 4, barely worn, and she had bought them for $2 because they were so small, so perfectly formed, and because she couldn't stop thinking about how a child would feel putting them on, how special they would feel, how loved. Because I couldn't save him, Aria whispered. 3 years ago. Different shelter. Little boy, age 4, pneumonia. Her voice fractured. I begged them to take him to the hospital. They said wait until morning. He died at 4:17 a.m. in my arms. I could feel him getting colder and I kept singing to him because I didn't know what else to do. So when Noah showed up, terrified and not speaking, I swore I wouldn't let that happen again. I couldn't. Silence stretched across the penthouse. The city hummed beyond the glass. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed and faded. Sergio muttered something in Italian that sounded like a prayer. Enzo turned away from his phone call. Lucian leaned forward. His voice dropped to a register that made the air itself feel heavier. My son has been missing for 4 months. Taken during a coordinated strike by the Dimitri Syndicate as revenge for what I did to my brother. I burned this city to the ground looking for him. I paid $200,000 in ransoms that led nowhere. I tortured 17 men trying to find where they were keeping him. I made deals with people I swore I'd never work with again. And while my entire empire was falling apart, while my network of informants and soldiers and police contacts were all turning up empty, a nanny who sleeps in a closet and has $34 found him. Kept him safe. Brought him home. His hand reached out across the space between them. It stopped 3 inches from her face, giving her the choice to move closer or away. She leaned into it. His fingers were warm. Calloused. The kind of hands that had hurt people, but weren't hurting her. You're not nobody, he said. Not anymore. Before Aria could respond, the elevator chimed from somewhere deeper in the penthouse. Footsteps approached across marble tile. 2 people. One set heavy and deliberate, one set light and clicking with expensive heels. Sergio and Enzo both straightened. Their hands moved instinctively toward their jackets and then stopped, held by some silent command from Lucian. Sophie Langford emerged from the shadows like poison seeping into water. She was beautiful the way expensive things are beautiful, not through any natural quality but through the sheer cost of maintaining the illusion. Her dress was white silk, probably $6,000, and it fell from her shoulders like snow. Her blonde hair was perfectly waved. Her smile was perfect too, and it reached all the way up to her eyes without actually touching them. Behind her came Harold Brennan. Aria's body went rigid. Her hands stopped shaking because they had nowhere to go, frozen in place the way prey animals freeze when the predator is close. Harold Brennan was tall and soft, the way men who had never worked a day in their lives get soft. His suit was expensive but ill-fitting, straining across a stomach that had expanded with years of wine and privilege. His face was flushed red, and his eyes held the particular cruelty of a man who had never been told no in his life and saw everyone around him as problems to be solved through pressure, threats, or violence. "Well, this is cozy," Sophie said, her voice like honey over razors. "Our missing nanny, found safe and sound in the penthouse of San Francisco's most dangerous man. How fortuitous. How very fortuitous." Aria opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Harold Brennan stepped forward. "Ms. Santos, you missed our appointment 3 days ago. That was very unprofessional. Very costly to me. I've been patient, haven't I? Patient with your excuses, patient with your shortages, patient with your—" "That's enough," Lucian said softly. The temperature in the room dropped. Not metaphorically. Aria could actually feel it, like someone had opened a window into winter. Harold Brennan stopped mid-sentence. His face flushed darker. "Now look here, Ferraro. This is a private matter between. You're looking at a woman you assaulted. Twice. The second time, you left bruises on her throat. The bruises are still visible. That makes this my matter now." Sophie stepped between them with the grace of someone who had played this game before. "Lucian, darling, we both know this is a misunderstanding. Harold simply expects payment from his tenant. Aria has accumulated some debts. Back rent, late fees, property damage. The total comes to approximately $85,000, due in 5 days. It's all very standard, very legal. Surely a man of your sophistication understands that every landlord must protect his investments." Aria felt the number like a physical blow. $85,000. She made $3,000 a month total, across every job she had. That was more than 2 years of salary. That was impossible. The eviction papers were filed this morning, Sophie continued smoothly. Harold has also mentioned that if full payment isn't received by next Friday, he'll be forced to pursue legal action. And of course, Aria will be unable to secure housing anywhere in San Francisco, given the judgment on her record. Or anywhere else, really. The property owner network is quite interconnected. Lucian rose from the couch with Noah still asleep against his chest. He moved like water, silent and flowing, and his face had gone completely blank. That was somehow more frightening than if he had exploded in anger. "Get out," he said. Not loud. Not angry. Just a simple statement of fact delivered in a voice that sounded like death itself saying goodbye. Sophie's smile never wavered. "Of course. Come, Harold. Let's leave them to their evening." Harold Brennan didn't move. His eyes were on Aria, and they held the specific hunger of a man who had cornered prey. "You know what happens if you don't pay, girl? You end up on the street. You end up like those people you volunteer with at the shelter. You end up with nothing." "Now," Lucian said. Sergio and Enzo moved. Not violently. They simply positioned themselves between Harold and Aria, their bodies forming walls, their presence communicating with perfect clarity what would happen if he tried to advance even 1 inch further. Harold Brennan retreated. Sophie followed him toward the elevator, her heels clicking against the marble like a clock counting down. She turned back once, her eyes finding Aria across the penthouse. "When this falls apart, and it will, don't bother coming back to the Langford residence. There won't be a position waiting for you." The elevator doors closed with a sound like a coffin lid being sealed. Aria sank back into the chair. The numbers wouldn't stop spinning in her head. $85,000. 5 days. The eviction notice filed. The trap snapped shut so completely that she couldn't see any way out that didn't lead to the streets. Lucian carefully laid Noah on the couch, arranging pillows around him so the boy wouldn't fall. He covered him with a blanket that cost more than Aria's monthly salary, then turned to face her. "Listen to me carefully," he said. "Harold Brennan is not your problem anymore. Sophie Langford is not your problem anymore. The eviction is not your problem. Do you understand me?" "You don't understand," Aria said. Her voice sounded very small in that enormous room. You don't understand what they can do. Harold owns buildings all through the Tenderloin. If he spreads the word that I'm bad for property values, that I'm difficult, that I'm a problem, no one will rent to me. And Sophie, she's connected to everything. She knows everyone. She can make sure no one hires me. I know, Lucian said simply. That's why you're not going back out there. Then what? I just stay here forever? I hide in your penthouse like I'm your prisoner instead of your problem. No. Lucian moved to the windows, and the city lights illuminated his profile, showing her the scar that ran from his left eye down to his jaw. She had read about that scar in the newspapers 3 years ago, when the Ferraro family had turned on itself and blood had spilled through the streets like rain. You stay here because it's safe. You stay here because my son won't let you leave. And you stay here because I'm going to make sure that Harold Brennan and Sophie Langford understand that destroying you means destroying themselves. And destruction, Aria, is something I am exceptionally good at. He said it like a promise and a threat all wrapped into one. Outside the windows, the city glowed and pulsed and continued on, oblivious to the fact that 5 days away, everything was about to change. The rain hammered against the pier like gunfire, each drop a small impact against wood and steel. Aria stood at the railing, her hands gripping wet metal, the black water churning below her like something alive and hungry. 11:34 in the evening. The storm had returned, worse than before, and she was alone with $34 in her pocket and nowhere left to run. Behind her, the city glowed through the downpour. Somewhere in one of those buildings, Lucian was still awake. Somewhere above the fog and rain, Noah was sleeping in a bed that cost more than she had earned in 3 months. And somewhere in the financial district, Harold Brennan was asleep, secure in the knowledge that by morning, he would own her completely. She pulled the letter from her jacket. The paper was already dissolving at the edges, ink running like tears. 3 days. She had let herself have 3 days of believing that safety was real, that a man like Lucian Ferraro could want a woman like her without eventually destroying her. 3 days of watching Noah smile. 3 days of feeling like maybe, just maybe, she was more than nothing. The tiny blue shoes were still in her pocket. She had taken them when she left. Not her own shoes, someone else's. A boy from the shelter, 3 years ago, maybe 4. She had found him on the streets during a winter night so cold that breath froze in the air. He had owned nothing except those small blue shoes his mother had put on his feet before she abandoned him. Aria had held him while he died of pneumonia in the free clinic. She had promised him, promised his ghost, that she would never again let a child be forgotten. Never again let someone small and helpless disappear into nothing. Noah's face when he finally smiled yesterday. The way his hand had reached for her. She couldn't let that reach pull her down with him. The water looked black and endless. Waves crashed against the pier's wooden posts with a sound like bones breaking. Her mind spiraled downward, each thought darker than the last. Harold would find her. Sophie would make sure every door slammed closed. She was 31 years old, but she looked 50. She was tired. She was so deeply, completely tired. Maybe drowning was softer than another 20 years of being crushed. Her fingers loosened on the railing. Then, a voice cutting through the rain and her despair. Step away from the edge, Aria. She turned. Lucian stood 20 feet back, soaked through, no jacket, his white shirt plastered against his chest. Water ran down the scar on his face. He was holding her letter, the paper falling apart in his hands. And his face was devastated in a way she had never seen, like someone had reached inside his chest and torn something essential away. You were going to leave, he said. His voice wasn't angry. It was broken. Without saying goodbye. Without giving me a chance to. He stopped. Tried again. You think I'd let you walk into the dark alone? You read the letter. Every word. 3 times. He moved closer. 10 feet now. You're wrong about one thing, Aria. This isn't another life. This is the only one we have. And I'm not letting Harold Brennan or Sophie Langford or anyone else take you from me." Before she could respond, headlights flooded the pier. 12 black SUVs materialized from the rain like something conjured from nightmare. Doors opened in perfect synchronization. Sergio emerged first, then Enzo, then 40 men in tactical gear moving with the precision of ghosts. Lucian made one gesture, a single movement of his hand, and they scattered into the darkness. He stepped closer to Aria, water dripping from his clothes. "I told you, amore. We deal with Brennan. Tonight." The warehouse district. 12:57 in the morning. Harold Brennan's luxury office on the 42nd floor of a high-rise in the financial district was silent except for his voice on the phone. "She'll come back," he was saying to Sophie. "They always do. I'll have her by morning, and this time she'll." The door exploded inward. Not kicked. Removed from its hinges entirely by a man's shoulder, Enzo, 260 pounds of muscle and purpose. The sound was tremendous, wood splintering, the frame cracking. Brennan dropped the phone. His face went from confident to terrified in half a second. He scrambled backward, knocking his desk chair over. "You can't. I have connections. I know people. The police chief owes me." Lucian walked in slowly, water still dripping from his clothes onto Brennan's imported carpet. His voice was quiet, which made it worse. "You put your hands on her. You threatened her. You tried to own her." Brennan's face went from red to white. "She owed me money. It's business. Standard collection. It was never business." Lucian nodded to Sergio, who stood by the windows with a laptop balanced on his palms. "Show him." Sergio turned the screen toward Brennan. Security footage filled the display. Brennan assaulting Aria a week ago, choking her against her apartment door, his face twisted with fury. More footage cascaded across the screen. Brennan with other women. 15 different victims over 3 years. All renters. All vulnerable. All trapped. Then the documents began appearing. Tax fraud spanning 8 years. Bribery of city council members. Illegal evictions from slum properties with code violations so severe that a family had died in a fire last year, a mother and 2 children, their bodies charred beyond recognition. All of it compiled. All of it time-stamped. All of it sent simultaneously to the FBI field office, the San Francisco Chronicle, every news outlet in the Bay Area, and uploaded to social media with Brennan's name, face, and 4 different addresses where he owned property. In 30 seconds, it went viral. Brennan's phone exploded with notifications. Calls cascaded in rapid succession. Investors abandoning him. City council members disavowing him. His lawyer disconnecting from representation. His wife's lawyer demanding an emergency separation. He collapsed into his chair, face in his hands, shoulders shaking. "No. No, please. I'll lose everything." "You already have," Lucian said, leaning close. "FBI will be here in 11 minutes. You're going to federal prison for 40 years minimum. Tax evasion, fraud, racketeering, and assault charges from 16 women who just got very good lawyers. All free of charge." Brennan looked up, trembling, tears streaming down his face. "Please. I have money. I'll pay you anything. I don't want your money." Lucian's voice dropped to a whisper. "You put your hands on someone under my protection. There is no amount of money, no amount of begging, no hole deep enough to hide in. This is mercy, Harold. Prison is mercy. Because what I wanted to do to you would take weeks." Sirens outside. Flashing lights cutting through the darkness. Brennan tried to run. Enzo blocked the door with his body, immovable as a wall. FBI agents stormed through the entrance at 12:58. Brennan was cuffed, dragged out while news cameras flashed outside the building. His face was plastered across every screen in San Francisco within 5 minutes. Financial ruin. Public humiliation. Total destruction. Not death. Something slower and more complete. Sophie Langford watched it all from her Pacific Heights mansion, sitting in a silk robe at 1 a.m, her face perfectly composed until her phone rang. Her lawyer's voice was urgent, terrified. "Sophie, we have a problem. The Chronicle is running a story tomorrow. Your connections to Brennan. Your knowledge of the assaults. Text messages between you two discussing Aria Santos specifically." Sophie's composure cracked like porcelain. "That's impossible. I was careful. Someone gave them everything. Bank transfers. Emails. Recorded phone calls. They're calling you an accomplice." Her publicist called next. Then her board members. Then her charity foundation. All of them distancing themselves in real time, watching the stocks plummet, the donations evaporate. By 2 a.m, Sophie Langford was trending on social media. Not for her annual gala. Not for her charitable work. For her complicity. For her cruelty. She called Lucian. He answered on the first ring. "This was you," she said. "You came into my home. You threatened someone I care about. You aligned yourself with a predator. What did you think would happen, Sophie?" "I'll destroy you," she hissed. "You'll try," he said quietly. "From the bottom, where you belong now." He hung up. By dawn, her investors had pulled out. The charity foundation launched an ethics investigation. The Langford family issued a public statement distancing themselves entirely. Sophie wasn't arrested, Lucian was too intelligent for crude violence, but her world burned in slow motion, every door closing, every ally vanishing, leaving her alone in a mansion that suddenly felt like a mausoleum. Public humiliation. Social death. Complete isolation. Both villains destroyed in one night. Each getting exactly what they earned. Lucian returned to the pier where Aria hadn't moved, watching the news unfold on Sergio's phone. The rain had softened slightly, becoming a mist instead of a downpour. When she looked at him, her eyes were wet, though he couldn't tell if it was rain or tears. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "Yes, I did." She stepped toward him. "The letter. I meant what I said." "Which part?" "All of it," she whispered. "Including the postscript." His hand came up, cupping her face with infinite gentleness. His thumb traced her cheekbone, and for a moment he was silent, just looking at her like she was something precious and fragile and real. "Then stay," he said. "Stop running. Let me prove that this life, this world, can be different. Let me prove that there are men who won't destroy you. Let me prove that you were never nobody." She kissed him. Rain and salt and the taste of finally being safe. But what neither of them knew was that this night, as perfect as it seemed, was only the beginning of learning what it truly meant to be loved by a man who would burn the entire world down before he'd let her fall again. 2 weeks later, morning light spilled across the penthouse like liquid gold, and Noah ran through the living room with his arms stretched wide, his laughter echoing off marble floors that once held only silence. Aria chased him, pretending she couldn't catch him, her bare feet soundless on the cold tile. She wore one of Lucian's shirts, oversized and hanging past her hips, and her hair was still wet from the shower. This was the first morning in her entire life when she didn't wake up counting the hours until she had to work. She simply woke up breathing. Lucian stood in the kitchen doorway with a cup of coffee cradled in his hands, watching them move through the space like he was witnessing something holy. 6'2", broad-shouldered, dressed in black slacks and an open white shirt, he looked like a man sculpted from marble and dangerous intent. But his eyes, those storm-gray eyes that had terrified a city, were soft now, following Noah's path across the room. Sergio and Enzo stood near the floor-to-ceiling windows, pretending to review security reports on a tablet, but both men kept exchanging glances. In 15 years of working for Lucian Ferraro, they had never seen him smile like this. Never seen him stand in domestic light without calculating angles of attack or exit routes. Sergio elbowed Enzo gently. Boss smiles now, he whispered. It's unnatural. Enzo's mouth twitched. Better get used to it. Aria caught Noah, swung him up to her hip, both of them breathless and laughing. The boy wrapped his arms around her neck, pressed his face against her shoulder. He was 5 years old, with Lucian's dark eyes and his mother's gentleness, a mother he barely remembered, taken by cancer when he was barely walking. Now he had someone who had chosen to love him. Every single day, he chose. She set him down, smoothed his hair, and Lucian crossed the kitchen in 3 strides. He kissed the top of her head with infinite gentleness, the kind of tenderness that made his men look away. Not out of disrespect, but out of awe at what they were witnessing. Their boss, transformed into something they had no name for. Something human. Good morning, Aria said softly, and he pulled her close, one arm around her waist, the other reaching down to ruffle Noah's hair. She had moved from the guest room to his room 3 days ago. Not because he demanded it. Not because she had nowhere else to go. But because for the first time, she wanted to stay. On the mantelpiece, beside a photograph of the 3 of them, sat a pair of tiny blue shoes. She had worn them when she was 4 years old, running through a shelter hallway, believing the world was large and safe and full of possibility. She had kept them through every year of loss and abandonment. Now they sat in Lucian Ferraro's penthouse, 40 stories above San Francisco, a reminder that she would never stop fighting for the children who needed her. 3 days later, Aria walked through the doors of St. Catherine's Children's Shelter with Lucian beside her, his hand steady at the small of her back. The building had been transformed. The walls that used to be institutional grey were now soft yellow and pale blue. Windows that used to be barred now let in unfiltered sunlight. The kitchen smelled like fresh bread instead of institutional grease. Children sat at long tables with real meals, not the stretched thin portions Aria used to serve from a can. Real staff now, hired and trained, not volunteers working double shifts for no pay. Lucian had funded the entire expansion. Not as a transaction, but as a declaration, this place, these children, mattered because Aria Santos said they mattered. She stood in what used to be the sleeping quarters, now a library with soft reading corners and shelves full of books. Her voice trembled when she spoke. The little boy from 3 years ago, the one with the cough, who we couldn't afford to take to the hospital, he would have lived if this existed then. Lucian listened without speaking, his expression unreadable, but his grip on her hand tightened. Now we can save them, she whispered. Now we do. She had been promoted to director of operations. She was no longer a volunteer scraping by on stiff tips. She was someone with authority, with resources, with the ability to say yes to every desperate parent who called. The position paid $45,000 a year. She had never dreamed of such numbers. She still checked her bank balance 3 times a day, terrified it would vanish like a dream. Meanwhile, in a federal holding facility downtown, Harold Brennan sat in an orange jumpsuit that hung loose on his frame, his face haggard and ashen. His empire had collapsed in a single night. His wife had filed for divorce and immediately moved to her sister's house in Portland, taking their youngest son with her. 16 women were pressing charges: assault, extortion, property damage, threats of violence. His trial was set for 3 months. The courtroom doors would open, and a parade of his victims would testify to every cruelty he had inflicted. He had tried to call Lucian 3 times through his lawyer, begging for a deal, for mercy, for some kind of negotiation. Lucian sent back one message, delivered with ice in the lawyer's voice: no. That was all. Harold Brennan would rot in prison for a crime he committed against someone Lucian Ferraro had decided to protect. His attorneys estimated 35 years minimum, possibly 40. In a federal penitentiary. Alone. At that same hour, Sophie Langford stood in her mansion on Pacific Heights, watching movers carry her furniture out the front door. Half of it gone, sold to cover legal fees from her ethics investigation and the civil suits Aria had quietly filed. Her phone no longer rang. The charity galas that used to feature her name in gold lettering no longer sent invitations. The society pages that used to celebrate her now published exposés about her complicity in Aria's abuse. She had known. The Langford family knew what Harold Brennan was, what he did to their nanny, and they had said nothing. They had kept her working, kept her silent, kept her desperate enough that escape seemed impossible. Sophie stared at a photograph she had printed from a society blog, Lucian and Aria leaving a restaurant together, his arm around her shoulders, both of them smiling. She was in a black dress that probably cost more than the entire wardrobe Aria had owned before this. Lucian was looking at her like she was the only real thing in a world of shadows. Sophie's face hardened, her jaw clenching so tightly her teeth ached. She wasn't done. Not yet. But for now, she was powerless. Completely and utterly powerless. She set the photograph down, face first, and turned away. That night, on the penthouse balcony, Aria and Lucian stood beneath the stars with San Francisco glittering below them like scattered diamonds. Noah was asleep, safe and warm in the room beside theirs, his nightmares finally gone. She leaned against Lucian's chest, his arm around her shoulders, her fingertips tracing the gold watch he never removed. The watch that had cost more than her annual rent 5 years ago. "I keep waiting for this to feel fake," she said softly. "Like I'll wake up in the closet at the Langfords, and this was all a dream." He pressed his lips to the top of her head. "It's real. You're safe. You're staying." She looked up at him, searching his face in the darkness. Storm gray eyes, the scar cutting from his left eye to his cheekbone, the hard line of his jaw softened only slightly by the night. A man who had built an empire through fear. A man who now smiled for a child. "You know what you are, Lucian Ferraro?" she asked. "Dangerous. Ruthless. Too damaged for someone like you." She smiled, and it transformed her entire face. "You're someone who fell and stood back up. Just like me." He kissed her slow and deep, the city spinning below them, the night holding them both suspended in something neither could name. When he pulled back, his eyes were wet. He didn't cry. Lucian Ferraro had learned decades ago that tears were weakness. But for her, he would learn. For her, he would become someone capable of breaking open. Inside, Noah slept peacefully, the nightmares finally silenced. The penthouse no longer felt like a fortress. It felt like home. Aria began writing a new letter, not goodbye this time but a beginning. She documented everything, every shelter, every child she couldn't save, every moment she almost gave up but didn't. She would publish it. Other women in the dark needed to know they weren't alone. Lucian read over her shoulder without speaking, just rested his hand on her shoulder, steady and constant. This was what real power looked like, not domination over others, but the choice to protect instead of destroy. She looked at the tiny blue shoes on the mantelpiece, then at Noah sleeping, then at Lucian beside her, his hand still warm on her shoulder. She finally had a family. Not the one she was born into, but the one she chose, and the one that chose her back. 6 months later, Aria stood at St. Catherine's Children's Shelter, now in a renovated building bright with natural light and the sound of children's laughter. The place was unrecognizable from the institutional grey it used to be. Noah helped her hand out books to younger kids, his small voice soft and encouraging. Lucian arrived to pick them up, and the children swarmed him immediately. The scariest man in San Francisco let a 5-year-old girl place a flower crown on his head. He wore it without a single moment of hesitation. Aria's voice rose, steady and certain, speaking to something beyond the room. "I spent years believing I had to be small to survive. That wanting more, asking for help, trusting someone powerful, would destroy me. I was wrong. The men who tried to break me, Brennan and all the others like him, they wanted me to believe I was nothing. That I deserved the closet, the bruises, the endless fear. But then I met someone who saw me, truly saw me, at my most broken. And he chose to stand beside me instead of over me. Lucian didn't save me. I saved myself the night I refused to let go of that railing. But he gave me something just as important, a reason to believe that falling doesn't mean staying down. That the people we love, the kids we fight for, the futures we build from nothing, that's what real strength looks like. The images shifted. Harold Brennan in a prison cell, alone with grey walls and silence. Sophie Langford in her empty mansion, the phone never ringing, every door closed forever. Aria and Lucian at a charity gala, dancing, Noah between them laughing, the shelter behind them full of children who would make it because someone finally fought for them. Aria looked directly at the camera, her eyes burning with something that couldn't be extinguished. If you're in that dark place tonight, if you think you're too broken, too small, too powerless to matter, I'm telling you that you're wrong. Real strength is not found in never falling but in always standing back up. Every single time. No matter how hard the world hits you. You stand back up. And if you can't stand alone, you find people who will stand with you. That's not weakness. That's how you win. Her final act was quiet and profound. She held the tiny blue shoes in her hands, looked at them for a long moment, then set them gently into a memorial case at the shelter entrance. A plaque beneath read, "For all the ones we couldn't save, and all the ones we will." Lucian's hand found hers. Noah hugged them both. They walked out together into San Francisco sunlight, a family built from broken pieces that refuse to stay shattered. If this story touched your heart, please like and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me what moment hit you hardest. I read every single one. Share this with someone who needs to hear it tonight. And tomorrow, we have another story about someone who refused to stay down. Thank you for staying until the end.